Hi, welcome back to Joe Blogs. In this brief episode, I want to provide you with an update as to what's happening in the Russian economy, and specifically to talk to you about Gazprom. Now, Gazprom is the business in Russia that owns all of the natural gas supplies, and Russia is sitting on the world's largest supplies of natural gas. As this table shows, the latest data shows that Russia holds over 24% of the total world natural gas supplies, which is almost 5 times more than the total natural gas supplies in the USA, and almost double the reserves in Qatar. Now, as you'll be aware if you follow the channel, prior to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Gazprom was a hugely profitable enterprise because it had built gas pipelines all across Europe and was supplying large amounts of natural gas to all of the countries who'd built up infrastructure that was dependent upon it, because natural gas is a much more environmentally friendly way of producing electricity compared with coal. So over the last 30 or 40 years, lots of countries like Germany and Italy had built lots of natural gas power plants. So this was working really well from Gazprom's point of view, because unlike oil, which needs to go through a refinery process before it can be used in most applications, natural gas can literally be taken straight out of the ground, put into a pipeline, sent to another country, and you get paid. So this was a hugely profitable business for the Russian state, which still owns 50% of Gazprom. However, unfortunately for Gazprom, following the invasion of Ukraine, most of its buyers decided that they no longer wanted to take its gas. And in the second half of 2022, Germany, which was the single biggest customer, decided that it was no longer purchasing any Russian gas. And shortly after that decision was made, the 2 pipelines that had been constructed by Russia that ran under the Baltic Sea, called the Nord Stream pipelines, exploded, and we still don't have a categorical answer as to who was behind those explosions. There's lots of conspiracy theories, obviously. But the bottom line is that Gazprom is now struggling because, unlike lots of other natural gas businesses, it didn't plan ahead and didn't build enough liquefied natural gas processing plants to be able to convert the gas that's sitting under the ground in Russia into a liquefied form so that they could start putting it onto ships. And as a direct result of all of these problems, Gazprom announced earlier this year that it had fallen to a $7 billion loss, which was the first official loss that Gazprom had made since the late 1990s. And that $7 billion loss in 2023 compared to a $16 billion profit that was posted in 2022. Now, as a 50% shareholder in the Gazprom business, the Russian state in 2022 received $8 billion in terms of its half of the profits, and also another $1.6 billion in tax that Gazprom had to pay. So overall, the Russian state made $9.6 billion from its investment in Gazprom. Now in 2023, because the company posted a $7 billion loss, the state obviously didn't get paid any tax, so it lost that $1.6 billion of tax revenue that it had made in 2022, and also it didn't receive its $8 billion in terms of its half of the profits. And the Russian state's $3.5 billion share of the $7 billion loss meant that the swing was over $13 billion. So that really starts to give you a flavour as to how much the sanctions are affecting the Russian economy, because it's losing a huge amount of cash from this very valuable natural resource. And the results for the first 9 months of 2024 have now been posted, and they show that Gazprom has made a further loss of $3.2 billion. So clearly another multi-billion dollar loss by Gazprom is bad news. But you may be thinking, well, $3.2 billion for the first 9 months of 2024 compared with a total loss of $7 billion in 2023 sounds like Gazprom is actually starting to improve. However, the devil is always in the detail. And the results published by the Kremlin show that the loss in the first 9 months was 309 billion rubles, which equates to around $3.2 billion, as we've just discussed. However, this compares to a profit of 446 billion rubles in the first 9 months of 2023. So what that tells us is that the results for 2024 are actually worse than they were this time last year. And you may be thinking, well, how's that possible? Because the year-end figure was a loss of 7 billion. And we've seen this before in terms of Russian accounting. A lot of costs seem to be put through in the final month of the year. So year on year, Gazprom is doing much worse today. It's made a huge loss compared to a profit in the first 9 months of 2023. And if it continues at the same rate as it did last year, then it's likely that the year-end loss for Gazprom will be significantly higher than $3.2 billion and could be more than the $7 billion that it posted last year. And just a final point on Gazprom, which I thought you'd be interested in. The company has launched legal action against the global gas business Linde, which it is now suing for $879 million. Now, if you follow the channel, you'll know that we talked about Linde before. This is a business that helped to develop some of the natural gas facilities in Russia. It funded some of the building of the plants and the infrastructure, and it was managing some of those gas businesses. Now, immediately following the invasion of Ukraine, Linde, along with a lot of other multinational companies, said that it no longer wanted to be involved in Russia, and so it walked away from a very lucrative contract. When you're talking about oil and gas businesses, they invest heavily at the front end, and then they take the profits over a long period of time. And obviously, Linde had made the investment, but it couldn't sit back and take the profits because of the political issue regarding what was happening in Ukraine. And I think it is really interesting that Gazprom is now suing Linde, presumably for breach of contract. There's no details as to why it's actually suing the business. And it's saying because Linde has walked away, it's left Gazprom in the lurch, and therefore it wants compensation. Now, that is quite laughable because if you follow the channel, you'll know that Russia has seized thousands of businesses and assets that were previously owned by the West. Lots of companies decided that they didn't want to continue trading and they wanted to sell those assets. However, President Putin decided to issue a lot of different decrees nationalizing assets, and so there was no value that was given to those Western businesses. But on the flip side, Russia is now suing a company because it walked away from its obligations in Russia as a result of the war in Ukraine. I think that really tells us that Gazprom is seriously struggling at the moment if it's having to pursue action against Linde for breach of contract. So the overall summary of today's video is that Gazprom, which is the state-owned entity in Russia that controls all of the natural gas supplies, and let's not forget that Russia holds the biggest natural gas supplies in the world, and natural gas is still a really sought-after fossil fuel. Lots of countries have built their power plants, they're dependent upon it. So there is huge demand for natural gas, but unfortunately not huge demand for Russian natural gas. Most of the countries in Europe don't want to buy it. And unfortunately, from Gazprom's point of view, they haven't planned ahead. They haven't built the facilities to be able to liquefy the gas so that it can be put on ships and sent to places like India and China. And as a result of that, Gazprom has now posted a loss of $3.2 billion in the first 9 months of 2024. And that loss compares to a profit in the same period for 2023. But unfortunately, the full year figures for 2023 were a loss of $7 billion. So it looks likely that the figures for 2024 are going to be worse than they were in 2023. And that is seriously bad news for Russia because it is losing tens of billions of dollars of revenue. And also it's a problem from Gazprom's point of view because it employs tens of thousands of people. And if it's making huge losses, then obviously somebody's going to have to fund that. And that somebody is going to be the Russian state. And so it's going to have to draw down further on its reserves. And this is putting even more pressure on Russia and its reserves. So hopefully you found today's episode useful, informative and thought-provoking. If you've liked what I've said, then please give me a thumbs up. Thank you for watching this video all the way through to the end. And here's something to put a smile on your face.